All right. We've hit the airwaves, gentlemen. Let's do it. Cool. All right. We got a couple people already joining us in the chat. Silver Batman Ranger saying, here we go. And Comic Breakdown saying, hey, yo, what's going on, guys? Thank you for joining us tonight. I think you're in for a good one. I really do. So I'll intro us up, and I think we can just kind of hit the ground running. Hey guys, welcome to the 65th episode of Let's Talk Comics, where myself and other co-hosts in the comic community discuss one of the many facets of the storytelling medium that is comics. Whether it be stories, creators, constructs, adaptations, we hit it all this week. I am delighted to be joined by three excellent gentlemen in the comic book space. Of course, my regular partner in crime, Comic Boom, to my, I guess that would be my internet right. Directions are not my strong suit on web chats, so forgive me. And of course, just below me are two fresh faces to the channel and to Let's Talk Comics. I've had the pleasure of chatting with them on their channel as well. But please give a warm welcome to Oscar and Chris from Lost in Comics.
What's up?
Thank you for having us. Thank you so much, man.
Oh, dude, it's a pleasure. This is needed to happen for a while, so I'm glad that I could finally pick a topic that I think is going to be well-rounded, something that I think all four of us are going to have some very specific and particular approaches to. But I want to let everybody know, if you haven't already or ask them to, please check out all three of these guys via the links in the description below. You can find their social media and their YouTube channels, where you can subscribe to their content. What's beautiful about it is, if you were to subscribe to Comic Boom and Lost in Comics, you're getting two very different types of comic book content. So it's sure to whet your appetite. And of course, if you don't hate me, feel free to click the subscribe button below as well. But with everything being said, I think it's time to stop beating around the bush and getting into the discussion of dismantling the bias toward comic book publishers. And by that, I really mean opening yourself up to not being pigeonholed to one publisher's content. And I speak that way knowing that I was one of those people when I first got into comics that pigeonholed myself into just being a DC guy. I mean, I started reading comics in the New 52. The first monthly book I was picking up, of course, was Scott Snyder's Batman. And it took me a while to embrace Marvel, but not only Marvel, indie comics. And if anybody is around the channel at all, or hears me talk at all on the internet now, all I do is rave about how good indie comics have been. So I'm just curious. I want to do a little bit of a roundtable and see where each of us started in comics versus what our spread of content is now for what we're digging into. And we'll start with the gentleman just below me, Oscar, man.
Yeah.
Where was your starting point with comics?
I think I started with DC, out of Batman, of course, and then right after that was Old Man Logan from Marvel, from the Marvel side, and it was just those two types of books that I stuck with, really, because I was new to comics and I was collecting everything. Everything Rebirth, I was getting it, and I had stacks of like Blue Beetle and Green Lantern because I thought you were supposed to get it all, but I wasn't reading it. I was playing catch up. But the books that I really loved was of course Batman and Old Man Logan, and I kind of stuck to those. And when I started to read other characters, it made me scared to delve into everything because I was like, this is not good. Like, when I was reading other things, I was like, this is not that great. And it actually took me, I want to say maybe a couple of months aside from The Walking Dead to really take chances on anything else, indie stuff. And so I don't want to move too far on into that subject, but yeah, that's how I kind of started with DC and Marvel and two characters pretty much, and I kind of stuck with that. So.
So do you feel like your big access point was finding those commercially successful books like The Walking Dead, like Old Man Logan, to kind of, make your way into new publishers?
Yeah, I think it was realizing that there was such good material out there. Like Walking Dead, I was only into the show. So when I walked in with Chris to a comic book store, I had no idea it was off a comic. So seeing that, it kind of blew my brain out. I was like, oh my God, like this is from a comic book. And that really gave me a taste for indie stuff. But I was just I took it real slow because I was spending tons of money on things I wasn't reading yet, but I was collecting like all the Rebirth stuff. Like, you know, so I kind of started off running, and I shouldn't have done that, you know, but there was nobody to tell us at the time, you know, hey, don't, you know, take it easy, you know. So,
Mm.
but, yeah.
It's tough, especially around Rebirth, man. I mean, you know, starting in the New 52, Rebirth was still fairly early on in me being a Wednesday warrior, you know, at the comic book store. So when all of these amazing books were coming out of Rebirth, I'm like, okay, I'll take all of them. And it's like between the volume of work that I was trying to pick up and the bi-weekly schedule, I totally get you. There were so many Rebirth runs that I was collecting that I just fell by the wayside because I didn't have time to read it.
Yeah.
So I totally understand you there, man. What about you, Chris? Where did you get? I need a drum set for this. Lost in Comic.
Yeah, man. You know, I remember when we first got into comic books, it was all about, for me, it was Batman. I mean, that's the thing. I wanted to know more about Batman. I wanted to know where the inspiration for the movies come from. I walked into a comic store. I've told this story so many times, but I walked in. The person at the counter was not very helpful. I said, you know, how do you get into comic books? Because I walked into the store and you're overwhelmed. You're looking at all the shelves, all the long boxes, like what, you know, how do I do this? I asked the person at the counter, how do I get into comic books? And he was looking at his phone. He kind of looked at me and he's like, well, what characters do you like? And I said, Batman, Ninja Turtles. Those are the two that I gave him. And he walks me over to the new comics that are out there, and I think he directed me to a TMNT universe. I think it was the number 6, which it was just like right in the middle of a story arc. And I, you know, being fresh to comics, you don't know what the heck. I'm like, okay, I'll pick this issue up. And I remember looking down on the bottom shelf. He walked away. Didn't give me any Batman recommendations, but I looked on the bottom shelf and there was some dollar comic books of reprints. And I went ahead. I saw the Dark Knight Returns #1, the facsimile edition. And so I picked that up. And when I came home, I remember reading the Ninja Turtles first. And I thought, what the heck? Like, it just did not make sense to me. Like, it was just right in the middle of an arc. I think they were they were in space. And I was like, this, what the heck is, like, I have no interest in this. And I'm like, maybe this whole comic thing is not, you know, what I thought. But then I picked up that issue of Dark Knight Returns, Frank Miller, man. I opened it up. It changed my life. It changed my life, man. I'll never forget reading that first issue. And I was like, what the heck? Like, just blew me away. And being a Batman fan, like I said, changed my life. But my perception going forward was that I wanted to know more about superhero characters. And that was what I did. I wanted to dive in to superheroes. And just like Oscar said, Rebirth came along, and man, he and I were just picking up everything, man. Characters we didn't care to know about. I was picking up Cyborg. I was picking up Aquaman, Green Lantern. I think there was 2 Green Lantern books, picking up both of them, picking up everything. I mean, of course, every variation of Batman that was going on, Nightwing. Yeah. I mean, everything. You know, and nobody at the comic store said, "Hey guys, you know, maybe you should kind of direct yourselves in this, you know, avenue, or pace yourself." They were just, you know, ringing us out, checking us out at the register. But
dude, I was just gonna say, finding a good retailer is a dime a dozen, because the unfortunate thing is that a lot of people that open up shops aren't like business people, so they don't know how to treat clientele. Therefore, they're not going to give you like the information that you need or point you in the right direction. I've gone through 2 or 3 different stores before I got to the one that I'm at now, you know, feeling like he is going to actively point me in the right direction if I feel like I need, if I feel directionless, you know, with something or whatever. And that, like you said, that'll make a huge impact. And what I think is going to be interesting is particularly Comic Boom and his perspective, because his is going to be way different than the 3 of us, just based on the fact that he's been doing it, I mean, all of his life. So the resident Canadian comic book cultist, man, like, What was your start with comics, and where did you branch out from there?
Well, I actually don't think it's that much different from you guys. I mean, I was, I think I was 6 or 7 years old. My mom took me to an old bookstore, and there was Superboy and the Legion of Superheroes on the floor, and I started reading DC, and I've just never really stopped. I was never, I was a Kurt Swan artist fan. I wasn't a Jack Kirby fan. I wasn't a fan of the Jack Kirby art. That's an acquired taste. That was a bias. Speaking of bias, that I never overcame until actually just in the last few years, I started to appreciate Jack Kirby's art more. And so that it's amazing how entrenched a bias can become, especially when you have it when you're really young, you know. And and I also missed out on some really good storytelling when I was younger because I got so entrenched in that Silver Age fantastical storytelling. I actually missed out on a lot of really good Marvel stories that were, you know, a little bit more real street level based. And oh, I still absolutely love comic books. I'm still collecting it. But there's no question that if I look back, I mean, you can never really, you can't really relive the past, right? But there's no question that the biases that you form, that first impression stays with you so long. So if it happens to be a Fantastic Four versus a Superboy and Legion of Superheroes like me, that can actually define you for life. I always sort of laugh. Well, I've gone through different stages in my life. I can actually identify the type of personality I was because I remember, you can give me an age and I can, if you tell me the type of person I was, I can tell you the type. I went through my Punisher stage. I went through my Superman, Batman Can Kill stage. I went through, I literally, you know, my views on capital punishment changed because of comic books. I mean, the biases that I formed and the way that they've even influenced my life, it just stayed with me. And finally, just a quick comment on with Future State here. I'm so, it's such an interesting time because I've got all these biases about what I expect from DC, and they're in a state of flux. They're corporately owned now, AT&T, and they got new writers and they're kind of getting rid of the old ones, or I think they are. And so we got all our expectations are really being tested here, all our biases. So it's kind of an exciting time, and yet it's kind of a little bit of a precarious time because all of us are going to have different views as to whether or not our expectations are met or shattered in a good or bad way.
Yeah, you bring up a really good point, especially with like modern publishing initiatives, stuff like Future State. I mean, I think it's pretty fair to say, just based on talking to you guys outside of being live, like I don't think any of us had high expectations for Future State. What does that tell you about the biases we were already beginning to form, and whether or not that carried through in our impressions of the books is another thing. You know, personally, I think I was such a DC guy that after I started spanning out, finding all this new content, between that and the direction DC's been going in these last 2 years that I haven't been entirely fond of, I admittedly, I think I'm self-aware enough to admit that I think I'm starting to form like an anti-DC bias right now. I mean, have you guys been feeling anything like that with, or maybe the opposite? Has there been a company that's just been consistently putting out something that you've loved that you're starting to maybe, you know, sing Eminem's "Stand" to in the bathroom mirror?
For me, you know, last year, and I think, you know, I don't want to speak for Oscar. I'll let him speak, but for me, last year Marvel really just plummeted for me. I'm a huge Punisher fan, and of course, we didn't get a whole lot of Punisher last year. Was not on board with all the events that happened. You know, I finally got on board with the King in Black, which has been excellent. It's been very, very good. But I do feel like that with Marvel. Like I started to just not enjoy some of the books, and I went very heavy indie last year. Heavy indie, and then DC, and then I was pulling like Daredevil, and Daredevil is my favorite Marvel book. Great book. But yeah, I mean, for me, I guess Marvel would be for me. That is, I haven't been enjoying it.
What about you, Oscar? What's your angle on it?
Yeah, very much the same. The same thing. I like to have good stories. You know, if I'm gonna spend money on something, I want the story to be great. You know, and the art to be good. And for me, last year I feel like Marvel was putting in half work. I feel, you know what I mean. Nothing was standing out to me. Daredevil was good, but I feel like I wasn't getting my Wolverine fix, wasn't getting my Punisher fix. I just, wasn't really feeling like I could go without it, especially when the pandemic hit. I really redid my sub list, and I looked, and I could have done without Marvel. You know what I mean? And but last year, I would say if I had to pick one style of books, whatever, it would be indie. I love Batman and Superman, but I don't know what my life would be like without indie books. I love indie books. I love the variety. I love the characters. There's just the sky's the limit with indie. You can do everything and anything, and I just feel it's so much more interesting. And so yeah, that's kind of where I'm at with that. Yeah.
And who would imagine you would ever said that when we started, Oscar?
Yeah,
Because
yeah, exactly. 'Cause I was so scared to kind of Walking Dead was like my fence area. I wouldn't really go past it. And I think the first thing I read after that was Seven to Eternity, and I loved that book. And it kind of, the more I read, the more it gave me the guts to try other things. And before I knew it, my sub list was probably 75% indie books. You know what I mean? So yeah.
I know for myself, I know I had a really tough time the last few years with DC, and they say that all suffering is ultimately self-inflicted, and probably I should fall upon my sword. I know Dark Knight has told me more than once, why do you keep buying crap you hate? It's your fault. You have a problem, get help, seek it, you need it. And there's a truth to that. The biases that I've been ingrained in my head. I love DC, I love DC, I love DC, except when I don't love DC, and I haven't loved DC for years. What's my problem? Why am I still reading crap I don't like? It's that ingrained bias. It's there. And don't get me wrong, I have a large indie collection too, and I love it. And there's always a test that I have that I wouldn't, it's a very simple test. It would always amaze me that on my comic book, my YouTube channel, I review mostly, a lot of Superman, Wonder Woman, et cetera. And yet the truth is, what's the first comic book that I generally read every week? It's usually on an indie comic. Why aren't I reviewing indie comics? If I actually look at what's the when you buy your comic books at a comic shop, test yourself, all of you, and be honest about it. Your average, when you pick up your bundle, you got 10 comics, and you got 10 minutes before you got to eat supper or something. What's the first comic you're going to read? That's the one you should be reviewing. I'm just putting that out there. That establishes, that's how you can intuitively use your mind. Your intuition is telling you how your biases should change. And I resist my intuition so much because I want Superman to be good. It's Bendis. It's got to be good. How can it suck all the time? You know what I mean? It's like I'm so stubborn. It's like, I don't care. I have to like this. I'm going to, that's how I have, I definitely have that degree of confirmation bias and cognitive dissonance sometimes. And sometimes I just got to step back and say, you know what? Just read what I like and enjoy. And, just because I've been collecting a long time doesn't mean that I'm not prone to those types of mistakes, because it's all psychological.
Yeah. It's rough. I know, for example, we got this little uncut gem of you seeking help at Sanctuary, and it was rough. I heard you had a rough treatment, pal.
Yeah, it really sucked when Wally West almost killed me, but I managed to avoid being killed just by there.
Dude, it was those bitchin' goggles that got you out of trouble.
That's right.
I'm telling you,
it helps being incredibly good looking. Absolutely.
and Canadian. Nobody wants to be mean to you because you're just so nice to everybody.
Being a narcissistic prick can save your life sometimes. It's true.
So, sorry, go ahead, Chris.
I was just going to comment on what Boom said a moment ago. Just I will literally force feed myself Batman books sometimes that maybe not necessarily enjoying. Because we don't get any Punisher books, I will make myself read whatever comes out, if it comes out. And it's interesting because it really is that bias that I don't do that for other characters, but my favorite characters I will, but I feel like I did break one of those bias with the Bendis Superman because I love Superman, and I read all the issues, but man, eventually I got to a point, I was like, I'm not enjoying this. And I think it was when he revealed his identity to the world, and I was like, spoiler alert. But I just, when I read that issue, I was like, I'm done. I can't do this anymore. I don't like this take on Superman. I don't like what he's done with Jonathan. And I dropped it, man. I dropped Superman and Action Comics, which was a big deal for me. So
yeah, I was like that with Tom King's Batman. I picked it up for far too long. I think the last arc I bought was the Poison Ivy one. And even then I was already kind of like floating on dissatisfaction. And Batman's my guy. I mean, my right arm is all Batman tattoos. You know, I mean, my channel is practically named after the character. And there was something about Tom King's Batman that made me trigger happy at dropping books. Like at the slightest hint of me not liking them, I'm just like, if 2 issues go by and I'm not happy, bye. I'm done. I'm out. I don't care who it is anymore. And it's to the point where like I've already dropped Tynan's Batman. Didn't think I would drop Batman twice in the same decade, you know, let alone the same year or 2 years. So I get it. It's difficult to pull the plug sometimes, but I think part of me, I mean, I'm always yapping at Rocky about this, and it's just like, man, understanding the ebbs and flows of the industry, I almost feel like it's my duty as a fellow comic book fan to not support a book just because a big name character is on it, and to support it if I like it, because most people don't really consider it this way, but when you're giving a book direct market dollars, that's telling the company that you want more, and they're going to keep giving you more. You know, that's why, I mean, you know, I know some people did like Tom King's Batman, and good for them, but there were a lot of us that were bitching and moaning about it for years, and a lot of people waited to drop it. You know, it took Batman selling like less than the Hulk for DC to maybe think, okay, maybe giving this guy 105 issues was a bad decision. You know, but that's what it took. And a lot of people hate Reddit. Honestly, people do that all the time, and they don't realize they're contributing to the thing. It's like, boy, the comic books treat comic book fans treat the comic book industry like Anakin treated the Jedi Code. It's nuts.
I know for me and Chris, one of those characters was Wolverine. We picked it up when it started this past year, and I think I got to issue. I was looking here. I got to issue 6, and I dropped it because I was on probably 3 more issues than I should have, and it was just a book that I was very disappointed with. I kept hoping, and my hopes were constantly being dashed. I just said, you know what, that's it. And you know, it's funny because once you pull one plug, it's so much easier to start just pulling the plug everywhere, and that can get kind of scary because, but it really makes you look at everything you're reading and like, do I enjoy this? And I think with a lot of things like you know, that was said a little while ago, I think what you grow up hearing about or reading about, maybe they form your opinions on what you're going to stick with, and that can also be kind of hard to break away from. You know, before I got into comic books, I loved Superman. Didn't know much about the character except from movies, you know. But when I got into it, comics, that was something that was very disappointing. Was there was really no good Superman stories, tons of good Batman stories because you can do so much with a character. But that was one thing I noticed real quick was Superman was a hard book to find that's really good, a good story, you know. So,
but that's sort of related to the idea of positive stereotypes, because positive stereotypes are really hard to overcome. And an example of a positive stereotype would be, well, it's a comic book. Are you more inclined to buy a new comic book if DC publishes it or Marvel as opposed to an indie comic? Before, the big two always had the advantage that if it was a new comic with DC or Marvel, it would likely have more traction. But more and more people are moving away and abandoning their positive stereotypes. Same applies to big names. I gave Bendis a chance because it was Bendis, and I loved his Daredevil, and I had a whole slew of things I liked about Bendis at Marvel. A lot of things I didn't, but again, give up. You know, it's that positive stereotype, and often you can be rewarded if you do that. But I think sometimes it's more difficult to overcome a positive stereotype, a bias, than it is everything else. Because what's a big name? Well, Tom King went from, you know, whatever, Omega Man and the Vision to Batman. And so he had a lot of really initial big hype. And then you got, well, then even Snyder over to Justice League into Death Metal. I mean, all these biases. And, you know, the fact of the matter is that at the end of the day, we have to decide for ourselves whether or not we like something. And it's really disturbing to myself. I get awfully pissed off at myself. It might be my drinking problem that doesn't help. But I mean, really, it doesn't help at all that, you know, if I don't like something, why do I keep reading it? I mean, it really is.
Yeah.
It really is something that is a problem, and it's like an addiction. You know, it's still on your pull list, or you forgot to tell the retailer to take it off. So you go to pick up your comics, and it's like, oh, that's still here. That's another test I have. The retailer gives me my pile of comics, and I realize I got to pay what? I got to pay what? That's before tax? What? Are you kidding me? Suddenly that comic I don't read very much, that's at the bottom of the list. Suddenly price is also a factor that contributes to my reconsideration of my bias.
Yeah, you really got to stick by your beliefs and your guns, man. Because I know for me it's tough if I don't like something, but like since Chris is my partner with a lot of stuff, if he likes it, I almost doubt myself, and I'm like, maybe I should read it again then because I didn't enjoy it. But you got to be strong, and like, well, if I don't like it, I just can't keep getting it, and it's helped me keep my wallet a little better and my sub list a little shorter. But I can honestly say I'm reading everything that I enjoy. So, you know, but it can be tough. It can be tough.
Well, like, I don't know how you guys are with like, I have this, and it's been ingrained in me since I started collecting, but about wanting to be a completionist, you know, like I want to have, you mentioned, you know, Batman, Tom King. I enjoyed, for the most part, I did not like the Nightmare issues. But with the exception of that, I enjoyed the run. But I will say, no matter what on Batman, I'm like, I feel this need to want to read every single issue, and I want to have every issue. And even if it's a dud, I'm like, no, I gotta complete the run. I gotta continue the run. I gotta have every issue in my box. And I feel like that with, I mean, it's kind of going off topic a little bit, but I think it's my bias for those characters. I want to support. And Donnie Cates, he's a writer, right? That everybody loves Donnie Cates, man. Everything he writes seems to be gold. I remember he moved over to Marvel, started the Guardians of the Galaxy and with Silver Surfer. I did not like those. I didn't like the books, but I felt this need to, like, I got to keep reading it because Donnie Cates has got to turn around. But eventually I dropped, you know, both of those series because I just was not enjoying it, man. So interesting.
Yeah, I echo that with Scott Snyder, actually. For a good majority of the beginning of like my comic book reading, quote unquote, career, I guess you can say, Scott Snyder was my guy. I mean, his Batman was, I mean, it still is incredible. I loved his Witches. I loved his indie stuff. I thought he was a genius. And when he got announced on Justice League, I sort of, and hear me out, I irrationally was like, this is going to be incredible. Then I thought later on, what in Scott Snyder's catalog convinced me that he would be good at writing a big ensemble book? Right? Not saying that nothing convinced me that he wasn't a great writer, because he was my favorite at the time. But being great at writing different things is a very important thing to keep track of. And I just was so disappointed by his Justice League, and him having been my guy. I desperately wanted Snyder to turn me around. I liked the beginning of Metal. I thought it fell off the face of the earth come issue 7. The beginning to his Justice League was solid, and then it just got convoluted. And I mean, don't get me started on Death Metal or the Year of the Villain stuff. But I tried to force my way through it, and I was the guy who was actively like, drop a book if you don't like it. And I man, now I'm just like, I hear like Death Metal was the first Scott Snyder project I didn't even attempt to purchase. Like, I refused to do it 100%. You know, and I'm fortunate enough to get review copies to where, you know, I could review it. But even then I read the first 2 issues and was like, I can't even read this. Like, I'm never going to look at Scott Snyder the same. I'm sorry, I can't do it. Which, you know, is it is what it is, unfortunately. But I'm curious because I know a lot of folks in the chat are talking like about DC Black Label, and I know DC Black Label is sort of the next step between Big Two and indie. And even further than that, you go back to the Vertigo days of DC, which for me was my gateway into indie comics, because although Vertigo was not an independent publisher, the type of storytelling they were doing was very much the progenitor of the indie comics model. I mean, without Vertigo, you don't get Image in 2010, you know, till now. You don't get Modern Boom Studios. So I'm curious for you guys as well. What was the thing that shepherded you from Big Two Comics into accepting indie? Because I know for me, that was a massive threshold for me to cross. I did not want to do it. I thought there was too much randomness. I wanted my superheroes characters I could know and love, and look back on a franchise or a history or a continuity. But you know, once I opened that indie door through Vertigo, there was no stopping me. So I'm curious, what was it like that for you? What I know, Oscar, you were saying it probably started with The Walking Dead, but was there what would have given you that nudge to go past Walking Dead, for example?
I think the thing that really did it was I was so saturated with hero stuff. I felt like I needed a break from everything being hero related, and indie comics gave me that other of stories, you know. I think I had got onto like God Country and other indie stuff that was like I said, it opened my taste up, I guess, to see what was out there. And after I read good stories, and it was such a difference. I do agree though. I felt what you felt too, where there wasn't a lot of I guess it was kind of spread. You know, the stories could be whatever they want, and that was kind of a little different. But I did feel that just break from everything being hero related, and you know, the top company, you know, DC and Marvel. And I at that point I fell in love with indie books, you know, the stories. So yeah, so that's how it happened for me.
That'll do it. But before we hook you in too long, I know, Oscar, you have family duties to attend to. So hey, man, I'm glad you got to hang out and chat with us for a little bit. I just let the folks know at home where they can find you on the internet and keep up to date with everything you're doing.
Well, first of all, I appreciate you having me on, having us on. I'm glad I got to come on for a little bit at least. But yeah, we're Lost in Comics on YouTube. On Instagram, it's Lost_Comics, and or is that Twitter? I get them confused, but anyways, yeah, man. So we're on every Thursday, doing our thing, and so yeah, but again, man, I appreciate y'all having me on, man, giving me, you know, letting me come on for a little bit. So it was a lot of fun.
Nice meeting you, Oscar.
Yeah, nice meeting you too, man. All right.
Our pleasure, man. Have a great night. Hopefully we'll see you soon.
All right, man.
See you, Oscar.
All right, later.
All right. So Rock, I think for you, what's interesting is, I mean, you were reading comics when like the wave of indie comics really began. So is that where it started for you? Did you get hyped up on the early Image wave, or was it something else?
I confess I wasn't too much on the early Image wave. I actually thought the early Image comics were terrible, and I frankly still think they're terrible. I think early Youngblood is probably one of the worst comic book reading experiences you could have. I would never wish that on anybody. Well, I would wish that on my enemies, because but then they would never want to read another comic again. Like I make a joke. I'm showing my bias. I love Image comics now, but I mean, look, they started off, I figured that they struggled, but they became very successful, and God bless them and God love them, because they're hitting it out of the park now. Image, they're doing fantastic. It's hard to imagine the comic book landscape now without Image comics in it. I mean, all those guys are legends in the industry. It's great stuff. What pulled me to the indie side, whether it was Vertigo, it was usually mostly Vertigo, but it was anything really, was just that there's something about when a writer has passion and they have their own independent title, they got something to prove. And I don't know, more often than not, it's just better storytelling. And that's what it was for Vertigo. And Shelley was Karen Berger at the time. I mean, she did an excellent job, sort of putting together, finding the right talent, finding, Neil Gaiman. I mean, really made his name for himself with Sandman. This was really good quality storytelling. And I mean, it just hooked you in, and it was a little bit more adult, and it wasn't. It brought respect to a medium, and that was another thing that helped me break out the biases. Because I'll be very blunt. I mean, being a comic book collector never exactly got you laid a lot. At least it didn't me. So I mean, if you could buy something a little bit more sophisticated, it might not be War and Peace, but you'd rather be showing off reading Sandman than Batman. I mean, that's just the truth. It brought more prestige and respect to a medium, and that affects bias too. I mean, I think a lot of people are biased against comic books in general because of their floppies, the way they're packaged. The industry itself is overcoming a bias by packaging comics differently, so that people they won't read a Batman floppy, but they're more likely to read a beautiful Batman hardcover book with the best art in it by the best writers in the industry. So biases, the way comic books were packaged, overcame the bias. Vertigo was a different packaging. The comic book looked different. Even the type of paper was different at times. They experimented with, early in the early days. And then in any event, it was just trying something different. Anything that's different that throws us off can eliminate a bias. Or if you're not careful, sometimes it can reinforce them.
That's fair.
Yeah.
Chris, what about you? What was your push into indie?
I'm trying to remember the name of the first indie comic that I purchased. I didn't like it, but I do remember. I do remember my thought process was similar to Oscar. Like, we were purchasing all these superhero issues, and I thought I was kind of getting just a little bit burned out with just how much I was reading, and it all just felt very boxed in, like everything was just kind of like your standard. You get all these standard superhero stories. And I think it was somebody at the comic store just told me, they were like, have you tried indies? And I was like, what is that? Like independent comics? And so, yeah, I mean, they can tell stories. You can tell any stories. I mean, your story, for example, Area 51. I mean, it's like, that's something that can't be told in a Marvel DC comic book. And I wanted to tell you, I did get my copy today. So
beautiful.
I was worried, man. I was like, man, this is taking a while. Dude, got it today.
That holiday bottleneck don't play. It really don't play. Like,
it doesn't.
Did it get to you in good shape?
Yeah, it did. It did. So I took it out and checked it out. Everything's great on it, man. So thank you for this. But dude, I mean, independent comics, man. I have a lot of interest in crime noir. I have a lot of interest in paranormal, aliens, which, Area 51, stuff like that. It piques my interest, honestly. Yeah. Department of Truth. I don't know if you guys are reading that. Conspiracies. All these type of topics that you don't get a chance to typically hit on with these superhero comics. You can do anything with an independent comic. And I realized that I started reading some of these books. God Country, Oscar mentioned, dude, that was one of the first independent comics I read. And I was like, I began to get drawn to father-son stories like that. And then Kill or Be Killed. That was another one that I got into early on, and I discovered Brubaker, and I was like, what the heck? This is amazing, dude. And then I went down that trail of finding out what else does Brubaker do? Criminal, and started reading all the criminal books are just, dude. I mean, can't say enough good things about those books,
dude. And speaking of the packaging bias, you bring up Brubaker. If you would ask me 2 years ago about floppies versus waiting for the trades, I would have said floppy every day of the week. What Brubaker and Sean Phillips are doing now with these like quarterly graphic novels, they're complete packages, they're well done stories. They're not constantly dealing with all of these intermittent checkpoints, but they're delivering more work they've always put out high quality work. It's Brubaker and Phillips, but man, big shout out to Pulp and Reckless, which were their last two OGNs. I mean, you want to talk about dismantling completely the packaging bias for the single issue? That'll do it.
And I don't mind paying that price for those hardcover books, man. I mean, you get it. It's just I've become a fan, just like yourself, you know, with the single issues, the floppies. It's like that's the way to go. But getting these books and these hardcovers where I can just put them on a bookshelf, dude, I have become a fan of that. And the Pulp book and the Reckless, I'm in the middle of right now. I just started it the other day, and I'm already like, I get giddy just thinking about anything that Brubaker and Phillips do, man. But no, you're right, man. The packaging, it's just a beautiful presentation, and I don't mind paying that little extra if I'm going to get some quality writing, quality art, quality packaging, and so incredible.
I think it's important to, there is such a thing as the bandwagon effect. You see it in comic book reviews of the big two. Everybody's handing out 10 out of 10s, and there's all these biases, and what I really love about YouTube, the advent, the growth of YouTube, especially in the last year, happens to coincide, in my belief, and I'm sure you guys would agree, with the growth in the indie market. There's a movement away from the bandwagon effect. I like seeing more guys that, unlike me, are a little bit more varied in their reviews, review different comic books. That's what we need. It helps me overcome the bandwagon effect, to move away from the big two, just to try new things. The only way to expand our mind, we can't be afraid of disagreements. We can't be afraid of trying something new, of reading something new. I mean, I think that one way to overcome bias is to, realize that if we're never going to, if we're always looking, I hold myself accountable because I'm so guilty of this. If I review 10 comic books and I got the same criticism of all 10 comic books, then what is it about my buying habits that I'm buying? I seem to intuitively attract the same type of storytelling that I don't like. I gotta go outside my biases, because really, so every now and then my retailer's got an indie rack, and I get review comics I can read in advance too, but I don't get all of them. So if I see a comic, I have no idea what it's about. Sometimes just for shits and giggles, I'll say, okay, whatever, I'll try this one.
Yeah.
And sometimes I'm pleasantly surprised, sometimes not. But that's the one thing where, really, as I'm criticizing myself here, but there's really no excuse for us to be, there's no excuse. There's like 400 comic books published a month between Marvel, DC, the Kickstarter campaigns, the indie market, Indiegogo. Good Lord. There's no reason why we should be hampered down. And just another quick comment about politics and comic books and everything else. I think it's important to note that, there's when I was Googling bias, there's something called an implicit association test, and it's used, and it's been criticized, and we all have our own discrimination based on weight, race, and sexuality. A boss is more likely to hire somebody who's less overweight or you might be hired a more attractive woman than not. So we all have these biases that are built in. And we have them in comic book publishing too. We have them, there's this diversity push, and I think it's wrong to just assume that you're not going to like a comic book just because a black, lesbian, queer, gender, whatever wrote it. Like, again, if the story is good, the story will be good. So don't, I think that's important, not to dismiss things just on that basis as well. Because I got to admit, I'd be lying if I said I don't get a little bit of a cringe factor when somebody tells me who the writer is, and the only thing I hear about the writer is their sexuality and their skin color, and I learn nothing about who they are and what their story idea is. Sometimes I'm less inclined to pick up the comic, but if they were to focus on the quality of the story, I would. But again, that's a bias that, that's all part of the whole process of the bias and everything too. I know it's an uncomfortable topic, and but I think it's worth mentioning.
I think that's really good, man. For myself, I grew up in a very conservative Christian home here. I live in Texas, and comic books have taught me so much, man. Like, and dipping my feet into things that I kind of have this pull. I'm like, man, maybe I shouldn't. This is not great, like you said, man. And the more that I keep diving in, I'm like, it's expanded my mind, my thinking into things that I normally wouldn't have been accepting to in the past. And I love comic books for them, and I love this medium. It's like you have to get past these biases, things that you were taught when you were a kid. This is right, this is wrong. I mean, some of those things are not are not accurate. So it is a little bit of a touchy subject, but it's very true, man, what you're saying. And I was gonna say early on, there were some books that I remember reading. Saga was one of them. I remember reading Saga for the first time, and I remember reading the first few issues and being like, I don't know if this is for me. Some of the issues it's dealing with, but as I kept reading it, I was like, dude, this is so freaking good. Like, I'm enjoying this, and I kind of just let my mind go and enjoy it, enjoy the stories, and I think that opened up a lot for me reading Saga, and then I started diving into other things. So I mean, those biases, it's good to get past them, to break them, and I think comics is such a great gateway to expanding your mind and accepting things that you normally wouldn't have in the past. I remember this past year, 2020, AWA Upshot Studios started off. Man, I don't know if you guys had a chance to read Bad Mother.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love that series.
Yeah.
I love that series. It's like
amazing.
And I hate that he's not here anymore, Oscar, but he did not like the series. And I remember our first conversation about it on the show. We're talking about, I'm a bad mother. I mean, I told him I love this thing, and he's like, yeah, but she's, how is she doing all these things? How she has no training, no military training, and and I was, and again, I had a conversation with him afterwards, and he's like, I don't know why I have such a hard time just reading stuff like that. I just don't think it's realistic. And but I think after talking to him more about it, we discovered, like, yeah, I was like, you have that mentality towards a lot of books like this, and that opened up his mind to start reading some things that he normally wouldn't. So I love that evolution that we've gone through in these stories, and opening up our minds and expanding, getting past the bias. It's a big deal, man.
Yeah, and to be honest with you, like, I mean, if it wasn't for indie comics, I wouldn't have had the spark to make my own comic, and it was one of the most fulfilling things I've ever done. And I think that there would have always been a part of me as a comic book fan, and as somebody who fancies themselves a writer, I would have felt like I was missing out, that there was something really, really big unfulfilled. And it all came from me simply, I started on DC Comics. I got into Constantine and Swamp Thing that were Vertigo characters that appeared in DC. And I'm like, okay, these Vertigo shenanigans, these are cool. And then, once you get me on Sandman, and, I mean, obviously Watchmen wasn't Vertigo, but it was very indie-esque, and that type of content just, rocketed me out into that space. And here we are, years later. And then I'm like, well, why can't I do that? I mean, all of these different platforms and resources out there, and it'll change you. And honestly, I think I'm at a point where I'm enjoying more indie than anything else right now, just because of the diversity of ideas. And it's a prospect that actually frightened me early on in reading comics. I wanted my Batmans. I wanted my Teen Titans. I wanted my Wolverine. But now, I see a book about something like We Only Find Them When They're Dead, when it's about basically people excavating giant space gods, after they die for resources and materials. Or you get into something like James Tynan's Something Is Killing the Children. The diversity of idea, of thought, of theme will totally change the way you process story. And I think it's for the best, because it'll also make you look for some of those things in stuff you've already read that you never considered before. I mean, just because it's going to be packaged in a totally different way. And that's what's brilliant. And I know a couple folks in the live chat were talking about how, it exposed them to an entirely different way of processing story. And, Chris, you were talking about how, comics are such a unique medium. I mean, it is this incredible fusion of film of prose, of poetry, of visual art. There's nothing like it. It's one of the only American art forms ever, right? Like the only two American art forms are jazz and comics. And so, you know, you look at both of them, and what's consistent between the two is that it is this explosion of different ideas, of different approaches to the medium respectively, and it creates something entirely different. So that's what I always find so interesting, because a lot of comic book people, myself included when I started, are so reluctant to open themselves up, even though they're in a medium that's about opening yourself up, right? It always astounds me. I mean, I'm sure you guys see it online. Some of these like these groups on the internet are just insufferable, where it's like DC versus Marvel versus. Who cares? I mean, really, who cares? Right? As long as you're reading stuff that you enjoy, that's what matters. That's all that matters. And, you know, I can't thank indie comics enough, man, for exposing me to so many different ways of thinking.
I think one of the things I realized, the difference between my 52-year-old self and the 10-year-old me that collected comics, is that when I was younger, I let the comics entertain me, and I let the comic book set the expectation, and which was a much healthier way to read a comic and much more fun. You know, it's so funny. I remember reading a comic when I was younger, and it never occurred to me to criticize the story, because the story is it's the story. It's like, well, this is the story. I have no basis to criticize. It never occurred to me to criticize the writer. It's just that this is what happened. And if I didn't understand the story, it never occurred to me to think that the story sucked. I thought that, no, I have to figure this out. So I would reread it and reimagine it until it made sense in my mind, and I found a way to make it make sense. And that's why I enjoyed the experience so much, is because I loved this. I love the story. I gave the story the benefit of the doubt. I have to admit, my bias over the years, maybe it's just the adult, you get older, you get, you know, bitter and blah, blah, whatever. But now it's like, when's the last comic book I read more than twice? When was think about that. The last comic book you read more than twice. Oh my God, I got to go back a ways. Okay, now sometimes when we review comics, that doesn't count, because sometimes we have to, obviously, when we want to give commentary. But, you know, I'm much harder on comic books. And sometimes, you know, James Tiny in the Fourth made a comment, he gave out a series of emails over Christmas, and he made a comment that I thought was very, very telling, and I think is being reflected in his storytelling. James Tiny had made the comment that he felt that maybe storytelling, modern day comic book storytelling, is trying to be too sophisticated. It's trying to be too complicated. And that his message was, keep the story simple, and don't try to rewrite the reel, or try to do a fancy new way to tell a basic story. And he gives example after example of, you know, sometimes the most simple basic storytelling will entertain the most. And he used the example of Mandalorian on TV, a ridiculously simple premise, not complicated, not intricate plots. It's really fairly simple. And it kind of makes me, I think you had a good point. Sometimes it's just about letting the story entertain you. And I think that my own bias now is that, you know, boy, don't I love to sound intelligent, dissecting every ounce aspect of a story. Well, you know, most people, when they watch a movie and read a comic book, they just want to be entertained. And, you know, it comes down to one thing. When you're done reading a comic, are you entertained? You know, what's the Roman emperor? What is that? You know, entertain me, you know?
Yeah.
What's your take on that, Chris? Are you in that camp that you want to keep it simple, but good at being simple? Or do you want to push the boundaries into something that's going to make all the cogs in the machine turn?
You know, I was thinking when you were talking there, Rocky, right?
Yeah.
I keep thinking of Balboa, Rocky Balboa. But and there was a thought that I had when you were talking there, as far as, oh man, it's totally slipping my mind right now. Man, come back to me in a second, because I want to. There was something I was gonna say here.
Sure. Yeah. No. I mean, I in a way I can get where you're coming from, Rock, but I gotta do what I do and disagree. I disagree with you and Tynan, man, and I think it's evident as to
You're
why.
biased.
I'm biased. I'm biased to disagreeing. That's all I like to do. That's the whole reason I made the YouTubes. But I disagree with Tynan. I think that's also like evident in how like sort of mediocre I feel his Batman is, because he's not doing anything different. He's just introducing new characters as far as I'm concerned. I think there needs to be a balance. I think the only reason The Mandalorian works so well is because we've had an era of, for example, of Star Wars that try to do all of these different things and they fail miserably. So Mandalorian being a very simple but precise return to form, I think that's why it appeals so much, because of the rest of, if you look at the context, right, of Star Wars at large, this is the first thing that I think pretty much the entire Star Wars fan base, and that's saying something, because the Star Wars fan base might be the worst fan base on the face of the planet, are generally able to agree upon as solid. And I think most people understand that, The Mandalorian isn't reinventing the wheel. It's a lone wolf and cub Western in space using Star Wars tropes that Star Wars even created. And it does it really well. And like I said, I think the only reason it works so well is because of all the failures that Star Wars has had. I think that if everything we'd gotten from media wise from Disney Star Wars was similar, I don't think Mandalorian would stand out so well. And I think, looking at my particular taste in comics, my top 10 is populated with books like Sandman, Watchmen, Dark Knight Returns that broke the mold, that did it different, that decided to be bold, that decided to make you think about a medium that was largely considered to be children's picture books. So, respectfully, I'm going to have to totally disagree with the premise. I think that it has those types of stories that don't reinvent the wheel and do what they do well have a purpose and they have a place. But if that was the only thing the comic book industry was populated with, I would be stuck reading old reprints forever.
Wow. Yeah. As I'm thinking about this, at the end of the day, are you entertained, right? Are you not entertained? That's the thing, man. I remember coming to a place, we talked a little bit earlier about how I was getting all those DC comic rebirth issues, and I realized I'm not enjoying this. I was really trying to get into these stories, trying to understand what was he trying to say here? What's the message? And realizing that I am not enjoying these stories. And I remember coming to a place where I thought, if I pick up a comic book and I don't like it, I'm not going to read it. I'm not going to continue reading it. Of course, I talked about Batman and Punisher. Right? Got them back here. Those two characters are probably the two that I would say that I still will hold on for dear life until something turns in the story. But again, is the story good? Am I entertained? And I think it really does come down to that simple fact. And talking about The Mandalorian, I think that it's funny, but a lot of the stories we read are really, these stories have been told before. You just put, new, fresh characters, mix up the story a little bit, and people are entertained by that. And it's a simple formula. You talked about death metal earlier. Metal was cool for a while, when Snyder started that whole metal thing. But then you gave us the second round of death metal, and we said it several times on the show. I was just metaled out, man. Like I was done. It was just a regurgitation of everything that we had seen in metal. Couldn't wait for that thing to end so we can move on. So, at the end of the day, it's like, am I entertained? Am I enjoying this? Enjoying the reading? And that's it. I think it's just that simple, man. And so I do tend to kind of agree with the James Tynion comments, man.
I would one of the things that I think we're at a perfect time right now to test our own biases, and just a teaser for Future State, the Justice League issue of of Future State, written by Joshua Williamson, really challenges my bias. And I'm not giving away anything because it's in the solicits, but one of the biases I have is I think it's ridiculous that no members of the Justice League know the secret identities of the other members. But that's one of the premises of the new Justice League in the future. Because of a crisis that happened, one team member betrayed the other. Now, the future State Justice League, they don't know each other's secret identities, except for the new Wonder Woman and John Kent Superman. That to me, that's a bias I have against that. So whether or not Joshua Williamson can make that work, because it directly affects character dynamics and interaction, that's a bias I'm somewhat against it. But we'll see if Joshua Williamson can make it work. But that's one of the things that intrigues me about Future State is I'm so exhausted with DC that I think that's why I'm looking forward to having my biases challenged, because my thinking for DC has been so generally negative in the last few years that I'm inclined to let my biases be challenged, because it's the old story. If what you're doing, if what I'm reading isn't working for me, then, well, what am I going to do different? Why? either give me something different. And at least DC's doing that. All criticism aside, they're trying something different. I mean, enough talk about. Maybe I should stop bitching about AT&T. Maybe I should stop bitching about what Didio did. Maybe I should just shut my mouth and read the comic. And if I don't like it, don't buy the comic. How's that for a bit of advice, right? That's what I need to say to myself. So, anyways, I just saved myself some money on therapy. This is good. I'm glad we're doing this tonight.
The whole Future State, the whole thing is a challenge to our bias. We had a whole conversation on the show, right at the beginning or New Year's Eve, and talking about Future State. Are we interested in even reading this, because it's they're new characters in the old characters' shoes, basically. You got a different Batman in the next Batman. We talked about it a little bit pre-show. Bruce Wayne. When I read Dark Detective yesterday, I'm like, Bruce Wayne is my Batman. And I feel like this, like I'm getting water in the desert. I'm like, oh, this is because that's what I like. I want, like, I don't want another Batman. But when I go back and read the work, the next Batman, yeah, it was not an exceptionally great story. It was a decent story, but it was enjoyable. It was not. But now, if I went into that book with just the mindset of, I will not accept another Batman, then it's gonna. How am I would not find any joy in that book. Same thing with Wonder Woman, with the new take, Yara, right? Yara, she great character, man, great. And if I go in there thinking, no, Diana's she's my Wonder Woman, same thing. And so this whole idea of Future State challenges all these biases that we've had. And I like what you said, Rocky. I mean, it's DC is at least trying something new. Not that I'm going to enjoy all of it, but you know what? Some of this I am enjoying. I really enjoyed the Robin Eternal. But I think some people are not even jumping on board Future State because of the bias, and they're just refusing to buy the issues. Like, I will not, I'm not going to read any of it. I'll wait till March when the other books come out and start ongoing with the other issues. And I think that, that needs to be challenged sometimes. Like, and I think it's okay to look past some of these biases and try something new. If you don't like it, don't buy it. But give it a shot. I'm really giving it an honest effort to read every one of these issues. And I'm not particularly liking all of them, but some of them I really do like. And it's different. It's not the norm and not the same characters you're used to. But open your mind, and it really will benefit you.
Yeah, you make a good point, man. I think honestly, you could have a whole conversation on character biases, let alone, publisher bias. I mean, I think one particular example is the Flash. It's so divisive. You have all of the pre-crisis Barry Allen lovers, and then the generation of folks that had Wally West as their Flash, or I would say my generation that grew up watching the Justice League show where Wally West was Flash, even though, come 2008, Barry was Flash again. So you have people that are vehemently in one camp or the other, and it will really hamper their enjoyment of stories for sure. But like I said, I think that's a whole nother discussion on its own. I mean, with the future state stuff, I think the thing that makes it difficult for me to talk about is because I'm very open to new things. I'm constantly talking about how the industry needs fresh blood, how we need new ideas in order to keep it alive and to keep momentum. I think for me, future state ultimately is been rather disappointing, is just because of the quality of story, less about these new faces. I'm all for trying new things. I am the guy that's technically out there campaigning to shelf my favorite character for a little bit, which might seem a little bit sacrilegious, but it just, I think the rough part about future state too is that you're going to have the people that are going to be in that camp, like you would mention, Chris, where they don't want to try anything new. But then you're going to have those of us that have been so disenfranchised with DC Comics over the last 2 years that are just like, I don't think I want to try anything from you right now, let alone something let alone uncharted territory. So it becomes a really, really difficult balancing act, I think. But ultimately, at the end of the day, I think everybody can agree that there's a benefit to trying new things. I mean, diversity is the spice of life, I mean, you look at, your background, Chris, all these incredible publishers with different types of content, wild and varied. Rocky has a background full of merchandise from multiple publishers, multiple characters. Shit, I have a background with my own publisher and my own characters, so it'll change you. So for anybody that's gotten to this far in the conversation, if you're I only read Marvel guy, I only read DC guy, or I only read Big Two guy or gal, consider checking out an independent comic book. And if you want to do that, I may or may not have published an independent comic book for you to start with. So I'll get that minor plug out of the way. As we kind of close out and head towards the end of this conversation, as people have mentioned and alluded to, I have my own comic book that's come out. The two gentlemen that are here on the call were gracious enough to back the Kickstarter in various capacities and support the book. I'll promise you one thing. These bad boys, for a 24-page comic, they're thick like Yara floor. I can promise you that. I talk a lot about, how I favor content that really tries to push the mode and to push the mold. And for better or for worse, that's definitely what I'm trying to do with Area 51, the Helix Project. We're telling a sci-fi noir story that uses all the things you love about sci-fi, all the craziness, all of the out there facts that look like they could be science, but are totally not. But we're also telling stories about people. We're telling stories about the real world, because to me, fiction reflects reality in many ways. And I hope you guys consider giving it a look. You can hit the link in the description. Check that bad boy out. You can pick it up on Comixology now if you want that sweet guided view. Otherwise, you can go to DarkKnightNation.com to pick up a copy for you to have and to hold, to cherish, to love, to do, frankly, whatever the hell you want to do with it. I just hope you read it at some point. But I kind of want to summarize and get into our closing thoughts, gentlemen. If you had to look at somebody in the eye and say they were a one-trick pony comic book reader, I only read this, I only read that, what is your suggestion to break out into new material, and maybe perhaps give one indie recommendation that you think is bar none excellent right now?
With a current independent book, or just an indie in general?
We'll say any.
Man, what I would tell somebody like that is, do you like television? Do you like movies? And for the most part, I mean, I think that's a universal thing. I think, if people are even if a DC comic reader, Marvel comic reader, I think we all have that in common, that we've watched movies or TV shows at some point. And I doubt from the most part that people are only watching DC Marvel TV shows or movies, right? So I'd ask them, do you watch TV? Do you watch movies? Yes, what do you gravitate toward usually? And then finding out what that is, and then from that point, for me personally, my favorite independent comic of all time, Killer Be Killed. I can't describe when I read it, man, and it was so many of the things you love about superhero comics, the vigilante, but also just in a crazy, so much going on in that story, mental issues, and that would be my recommendation. But to somebody like that, to pretty much to anybody, I've seen all these things on Twitter. People ask, what's a great independent comic to start with? I always put Killer Be Killed. I'll never forget reading the first issue, and that first issue had so much content. I felt like I had watched a TV show reading that issue number 1, and you got so much out of that first issue, so much more than you would normally get with just a standard superhero comic. So that would be my recommendation.
I think you have a really great approach, man. Rock, what about you?
Well, I think it's every now and then I give a little bit of a life lesson because I read self-help books because I need the help. And to be quite honest, we live in a world where there's all kinds of echo chambers out there. We certainly have them in our politics, and we're not here to talk about that. But we have echo chambers in comic books as well, and we have our biases, and that's what we're talking about. And frankly, the only way to expanding your mind takes work. Okay, so it's not something where my recommendations for comic books is look. You Google it. Go to your comic book shop. Anything. Independent titles and just go Google, put some effort and work into it. When in doubt, read it. Take a chance. I mean, it's amazing when you're in a restaurant, you'll try a new plate of food you've not eaten before. Why not try that with a new comic? Anything from Boom Studios to Dark Horse to a new Star Wars comic, or Marvel producing a whole slew of different titles. I mean, DC, Future State, everything's new and different. Everyone is battling for the dollar. Also, if you're on Twitter, follow someone you've never followed before. Follow someone whose views you don't like. Not to be an asshole, but just follow. Even in comic books here, whether you're SJW or Comic Skate, if you still believe that, buy a comic that you don't think you'll like. Read it. Go outside your comfort zone. Have a little fun. I mean, challenge yourself for God's sakes. I mean, it can be fun. I mean, haven't we all experienced that? Isn't it a wonderful feeling to read something that you thought you'd hate and you enjoyed it? Doesn't that feel good? I mean, when's the last time you felt that way about reading a comic book? Wouldn't it be great to read a comic book and it puts a smile on your face, and you don't have to think about tone and structure, and we don't have to. You're not thinking about the language of being a reviewer. No, you shed a tear reading it. Or it made you think of your childhood, or it made you feel about a loss of a good friend, or it made you feel about something that's important to you. You get that by expanding your horizons. And just remember that, and this is from an old guy like me, and I keep making these mistakes. Just because I've been reading a long time doesn't mean I don't fall back in the same old habits. We got to get out of our comfort zone, and don't be afraid to do that. And because otherwise, I think far too many people think they're in a comfort zone. And look at the state of the world right now. How many people are really thinking outside their boxes? Very goddamn few. Anyways, I really need a drink now.
No, it's well thought out, but I gotta know, if somebody had a lit match to your comic book collection and said, "You Canadian Kingdom Come Superman hat wearing man, I need an indie comics recommendation," give them something. You've gotta give them something.
Give them something. Well, I mean, it's kind of cliche right now, but I really like probably Pulp by Brubaker is really good. Pulp is excellent. It's a hardcover. It's just fantastic. It's about an old gunslinger who's still alive in the 1930s, right smack dab in the middle of the Depression, and he's kind of a nobody. And he used to be like really mega famous back in the day, and it's a great sort of tale of redemption. and it's just fantastic. And a little bit of a revenge tale, a little bit of everything. And Brew Baker and Phillips at their finest. Also, I love Tinian is hitting out of the park with Department of Truth. Something is killing the children. Al Ewing on, you mentioned it before. There's a reason why we mention this, because these are comics that are good. They only see us. We only see them when they're dead. Great stories. I mean, there's just a whole slew here. I'm actually enjoying Dune, House Atreides. I've just read the third issue of that. Been enjoying that. Adventuremen by Fraction. I've been enjoying that. I mean, it's hard to narrow it down. There's so much good stuff out there right now.
Yeah, you both. I think you both take a really, really good approach to trying to warm somebody up into getting into something new. And I agree with pretty much everything both of you said. You know, I don't think there's anything that either of you said that I could honestly add on except for giving specific recommendations. Pulp was definitely one of mine. If you're a hard DC or Marvel fan that knows the history of the early malicious comic book industry in the 1940s and 50s, you will love Pulp. Aside from that, it carries a lot of history. It also has a badass modern Western filled within its pages. You're safe with pretty much everything that Ed Brubaker and Sean Phillips are putting out, to be honest. If you're a big movie fan, you love Tarantino, go pick up Reckless. Just came out in a beautiful hardcover. If you don't want me to die broke, feel free to check out my comic book, Area 51, The Helix Project. It is also a possibility. Second issue's coming real soon, ladies and gentlemen. But if I'm not being a shill, and I want to give a sort of honorable mention, it's Vertigo. It's not technically indie. It's very recent. It's thought-provoking. It'll make you think about the current state of the world in a big, bad way. American Carnage by Brian Hill, Leandro Fernandez. It was the best book of 2018. No lie. Best book of 2018, hardcap. Makes you think. It's provocative. It's a beautifully told story. And it does have a lot of those independent comic book sensibilities, although it is not technically independent. But if I'm going to give you an actual independent book, let's go with, you know what? Let's go with Baby Teeth by Donnie Cates. I'm just looking up at my bookshelf here. It's different. It's out there. It's a what if a loving young mother has the spawn of Satan, and it's a story about motherhood. But your child is literally Satan. What do you do? Beautifully told story. Early Donnie Cates writing chops, and you can see him beginning to develop to the writer that he is now. So check out all of those recommendations. It'll certainly fill up your time with plenty of smiles, laughs, tears, so on and so forth. I want to obviously thank everybody for joining us. I know Oscar had to run out of here early, but Oscar, if you're watching this in post, thank you so much for joining us. Chris, man, it's a pleasure to finally have you on the channel. It was
Chris.
Nice meeting you, Rocky. This was fun, man. This was a lot of fun.
Yeah, I will definitely try and plan further ahead and have you guys on when you're not so pressed for time. You know, maybe one of these days, Rocky and I are known for occasionally having a let's just drink a little bit and talk about comics, kind of shoot the shit show. So
yeah, and maybe we get you guys on. I think here in 2021 we're going to try to get some more guests on to talk about New Comic Book Day. Maybe we'll get you guys on and have you talk about some new comics one of these weeks.
Absolutely. And I'd be remiss to obviously not thank, my usual partner in crime, Rock. Let's Talk Comics would not be what it is without you, buddy. So thank you for joining us as always, man. And with that, I want to refer everybody that's watching live or watching in post to go check these gentlemen out. You can check the link in the description, the descriptions below, links to both their Twitters and their YouTube channels. Real quick, do you guys just want to let the folks at home know what you have coming out, what the folks have to look forward to? Chris, we'll start with you, my friend.
So every Thursday we have a live show. Today we actually just right before this show we had a live stream where we had Sean Lewis, the writer of Image Comics Bliss. He's written Coyotes. Just a fantastic. He's also done a Future State, DC, Superman of Metropolis, and that was just an insightful, emotional interview. He really gave us some personal insight into some of the stories that he's written. We do this, like I said, every Thursday. We have a live stream, have a lot of creators on the channel. We also do new comic book day reviews. And we also just show off books in our collection, talk about toys, and really just get lost in comics. That's the name of our channel. It's a time where we can kind of just forget about what's going on in the world and get lost in some comic books and talk about comic books. And that's what we do every single Thursday on our channel. And we love doing it. I can't wait every Thursday, man. I'm itching to get on to talk about comic books. So that's what we do. And we love doing it, man. So
it's awesome.
Yeah.
I'm going to check out that interview.
Exclusive announcement here. It will be coming out on the Twitter and social medias soon, but in 2 weeks we will have on Philip Kennedy Johnson, who will be the writer for Superman going forward. So he'll be on the show in 2 weeks. So make sure you guys
I got to tell you, I'm glad you mentioned that, because with Sean Lewis, he's taken some chances there with John Kent. It's sort of a little bit hit and miss with me a little bit but again, it's about me giving the book a chance to sort of bloom a little bit. And same with Philip Kennedy there. I very much want his Superman to hit. So anyways, fingers crossed. But for me, I'm just reviewing Future State comics on my channel, and I'm only putting out probably 1 or 2 videos a week. So yeah, I'm just I just shoot the shit on Future State in the upcoming weeks. That's it.
Awesome.
Well, nothing wrong with that, man. Nothing wrong with that. Make sure you guys check them out. Obviously, Lost in Comics, man. I didn't even like the Superman of Metropolis Future State book, but their interview was freaking killer. To be honest with you, I wasn't a fan of the book, but the way Oscar and Chris conducted their interviews was like it was a casual conversation that also went the distance, and that's not something you can say about a lot of interviewers out there. Their love for comics is palpable. They have 2 sort of very different approaches to their comic book reading, which is a great thing to see bounce off of one another. So please make sure you check them out in the link below. Obviously, Rock is a comic book reviewer like no other. You will not find anything like what he's doing on his channel anywhere else. He also gives superheroes the occasional advice. So feel free to check out that. Yeah.
Yes, I'm experimenting. I give advice to different. I forgot about that. Yes. Interviews with various heroes in the multiverse. I instead of yelling at my real life friends and my family, I just yell at imaginary people in comic books. It's very therapeutic.
That's cool.
Yeah. I can imagine. On my end, first and foremost, if you enjoyed this video, make sure to leave it a like so we know that this is the type of stuff that you're enjoying. But I just dropped my review for Future State Dark Detective by Mariko Tamaki and Dan Mora. It was a partnership that I was quite skeptical of, admittedly, going into it, but perhaps I was surprised. Who knows? I know I've been talking about how I've just been pretty lukewarm with Future State, but who knows? Maybe this changes the tide of war. Obviously, you can stay tuned weekly for these live discussions on Let's Talk Comics, where we get together some of the best in the comic book space, just to sit down and shoot the shit, to be quite frank with you. So also, make sure you subscribe to these 2. Subscribe to my channel down below. And at the end of the day, I want to thank you guys so much for watching. Thank you for listening to me ramble. Thank you to these guys for putting up with me. And we'll catch you next time.